I'm Corey Rich and you're watching Adorama TV. Adorama is the place that I buy all things photo and video related. In this episode of my tech tip, we're going to be talking about advanced time-lapse photography and motion control. This is actually part 2. In the last segment, we actually talked about the principles of multi-axis motion control time-lapse. Now we're actually going to walk through the steps of setting one up here in Lake Tahoe, California. I'm using the Kessler Stealth 3-foot slider with the second shooter as my tool for creating this multi-axis time-lapse. So first thing that I'm going to do is, and before I pull anything out of the bags, I'm going to scout the location. So I arrived almost an hour ago and I spent some time walking the shoreline trying to figure out where I wanted to position the camera. Now, the whole point of doing a time-lapse with motion control is you want parallax. You need some objects that are close enough to the camera so that you actually see that sense of movement. Now, what I mean by that is, if there were no rocks in the foreground and the camera is moving, it's possible it will be lost on your audience. So when you're using motion control, you need an object in the foreground so that you create that sense of movement, and that's called parallax. I always have a checklist of the gear that I'm going to bring into the field, and I try to think about that in advance of packing my car, so I'm not scrambling trying to pack and think about equipment at the same time. So I'll oftentimes put a little list on my iPhone and notes. So today I need 2 Manfrotto tripods. I decided I'm going to work with my 3-foot Stealth slider from Kessler. I'm going to use the second shooter from Kessler. I need to make certain that we have the Manfrotto ball head that goes on top. I need my D810. I'm going to bring the D810 in 2 lenses, the 24-1.4 and the 16-35. Not sure which lens I'll be using, but I want to have 2. Extra batteries, so I have a couple of extra batteries for the D810. I have an ND filter, a couple of ND filters in case I decide I want to really shoot a slow shutter speed. I have extra SanDisk memory cards so that I do not run out of memory. I have a little bit of gaff tape just in case I need to tape cords out of the way so that they're not hanging up on the slider. And most importantly, I brought some stuff to keep me comfortable. I have a warm jacket, a hat, gloves, sunglasses, some water, some food, because I'm going to be sitting here on the beach for a couple of hours while the Kessler second shooter really does all the work for me with the D810 locked on top of it. One of the things I do is take the camera strap off of the camera. The last thing you want to have happen is that the camera strap gets stuck somehow on the slider. I'm always paying close attention to make sure that the cords are totally clear of the actual track, right? We do not want the camera getting hung up on a strap or on a cord. If I'm working in really remote locations, sometimes I'll actually bring a Goal Zero solar panel and even battery system so that I can make certain we have enough power for the second shooter. Now the first step with the second shooter, now that I'm set up, is I'm going to pick my 2 keyframes. So it's really the starting position where I want my camera at the start of the move, and then my keyframe at the end where I want the shot to end. Now these exposures are pretty fast, right? I'm going to be shooting in that realm of when the sun is out, 250th, 500th of a second, and at the end of this shot, I'm going to be in that 10-second range in terms of exposure. So they're not incredibly long exposures, so I'm choosing to use continuous movement mode, meaning I'm not going to tell the second shooter to stop while each picture is being taken. I think for my purposes, continuous movement will do just fine. The other setting on the Kessler second shooter that I'm paying attention to is the ramp speed. And the ramp is really from the start of the move, how quickly the camera moves to full speed, and then at the end of the move, how slowly it ramps down to a stop. So the next decision I make is what duration of time do I want the second shooter to take to go from the starting point, the first keyframe, to the end point. Now, I've already made the decision. This is a 4-hour time lapse, and I'm going to be relying on the intervalometer inside of the Nikon D810. So keyframe for the start, keyframe for the end, duration of time that I want it to move in continuous mode across the Stealth slider, and we're ready for business. I then switch to the Nikon D810 controls and set the intervalometer and make sure that I can make enough pictures during that 4-hour window to capture what I want. I'm in aperture priority with image smoothing turned on, shooting raw files on the Nikon D810. I want maximum resolution in RAW so that I can later go in and control color and contrast, have maximum control over the images. I'm selecting my depth of field, which ballpark is going to be 5.6. I'm on a 24 millimeter f1.4 lens. I liked the 24 millimeter focal length, so I switched to the prime. It's just razor sharp. I love this lens. And one of the things I've learned over time is once you're set up, I do a double and triple check. I make sure that the second shooter is ready to go, the tripods are locked, the camera intervalometer is set to go. I'm in manual focus mode on my Nikon D810 so that it's not going to search for focus. I check all of the settings, I press start, and then I really discipline myself to get away from the camera and not touch it. The worst thing that you can do is start to second guess your composition or your exposure or the way something is set up. Let it go. If it works, you can celebrate. If it doesn't, you learned a lesson. But sit back, relax, and actually wait to see those results, because when it works, it's pretty darn fantastic. I'm Corey Rich. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.